Navy SEAL training became famous because America could see the suffering. The beach, the cold water, the boats, the logs, the instructors, the men shaking in the surf while a bell sits nearby waiting for anyone who has had enough. That image is powerful because it is simple. You do not need to understand special operations to understand misery. You see a man soaked, exhausted, covered in sand, and still being told to move. That is why BUD/S became more than a military course in the public mind. It became a symbol. Delta Force selection became feared for the opposite reason. There is no famous beach, no public bell, no camera-friendly version of the pain. Most people have never seen it, and that silence creates a different kind of pressure. The SEAL pipeline shows you the suffering. Delta hides it. That is why Navy SEAL training often looks more brutal than Delta Force selection. Not because one is automatically harder than the other, but because they are built for different people at different stages for different missions. BUD/S is not the entire SEAL pipeline, but it is the part that became legendary because it is the easiest for the public to understand. It is an early gate. It takes candidates who want to become Navy SEALs and hits them with a reality that cannot be faked. The cold is not decoration. The water is not random punishment. The exhaustion, surf, swimming, boats, teamwork, and pressure all come from the maritime world the SEALs were born from. A SEAL has to be comfortable where most people panic. In dark water, in rough surf, under load, with teammates depending on it. So the training makes discomfort impossible to escape. It strips away the fantasy fast. A lot of people like the idea of becoming a SEAL. Far fewer like the reality of being wet, tired, yelled at, and still responsible for the man next to them. That is the first reason SEAL training looks so extreme. It's physical, immediate, and visible. It does not slowly introduce candidates to hardship. It drops them into it and watches who changes when comfort disappears. Hell Week is the clearest example. For several days, candidates operate on almost no sleep while the body is pushed through cold, movement, teamwork, and constant stress. On camera, it looks almost unreal. Men carrying boats over their heads, men locking arms in freezing water, men moving like their bodies are still working after their faces have gone blank. That kind of suffering has a shape. It has a place. It has a sound. The bell. And because it is visible, the public remembers it. Delta selection does not have that same public shape. Based on open source accounts, it is quieter, more solitary, and less theatrical. The candidates are usually not young men being introduced to military hardship for the first time. Many are already experienced soldiers from places like the Ranger Regiment, Special Forces, or other serious backgrounds. They have already passed hard schools. They have already lived under pressure. They already know what pain feels like. So Delta does not need to prove that suffering exists. It is looking for what remains after the resume stops mattering. That changes the entire nature of the test. BUD/S has to break down a large pool early. Delta selection looks inside a smaller pool of people who have already survived difficult paths. One course is trying to create and filter future SEALs. The other is trying to identify rare individuals inside an already proven population. That is why comparing them like two versions of the same test misses the point. SEAL training is public pressure. Delta selection is private pressure. One puts pain on display, the other removes the stage. A SEAL candidate may suffer in front of his class, his instructors, and eventually the cameras that turned BUD/S into a legend. A Delta candidate, at least in the public imagination, is alone with distance, uncertainty, navigation, fatigue, and the slow feeling that nobody is coming to make it easier. That kind of test is harder to film. A line of candidates freezing in the surf looks brutal instantly. A man moving alone under load for hours does not look dramatic, unless you understand what is happening inside his head. There is no team chant to carry the moment, no public collapse, no bell ringing in front of everyone. Just a long, quiet negotiation between the body and the will. This is where the debate gets interesting. Navy SEAL training looks more brutal because its pain is easier to recognize. Delta selection feels heavier in a different way because the pressure is harder to see. Looking brutal and being harder are not always the same thing. A punch in the face looks worse than a year of quiet pressure. That does not mean it tests more. It means the pain is easier for an audience to understand. But there is another question underneath all of this. When does extreme training become too extreme? Hard selection has a purpose. It should reveal who can function under stress. It should expose weak teamwork. It should show who can follow instructions when exhausted, who can control panic, who can stay useful when the body wants to stop, and who can still care about the team when everyone is miserable. But hard training becomes dangerous when pain becomes the point instead of the tool. The case of SEAL candidate Kyle Moen, who died after completing Hell Week in 2022, forced that conversation into the open. It raised serious questions about medical oversight, training culture, candidate health, and performance-enhancing drug concerns inside the Naval Special Warfare pipeline. That does not mean hard training should disappear. It means the line has to be understood. Elite training cannot be soft, but it also cannot become a ritual where damage gets mistaken for development. The goal is not to create the most dramatic suffering possible. The goal is to create the right operator for the mission. For SEALs, that mission world includes water, cold, chaos, fatigue, and team dependence under miserable conditions. That explains why BUD/S looks the way it does. The suffering is not only physical, it is cultural. It teaches candidates that the ocean does not care how motivated they are. The team does not care how bad they feel. The task still has to happen. For Delta, the mission world is different. The public details are limited, but the reputation points toward maturity, judgment, patience, independence, and the ability to perform without needing attention. The test is not built for a recruitment documentary. It is built to see whether a man who already looks impressive on paper can still think clearly when the environment gets lonely, uncertain, and unforgiving. That is a different kind of brutality. Less visible, less iconic, but not less serious. This is also why the SEAL versus Delta debate usually misses the larger point. Special operations units are not all climbing the same ladder. They are designed around different missions. Ranger School tests leadership under exhaustion. Green Beret training cares deeply about unconventional warfare, language, culture, judgment, and working with foreign partners. SEAL training carries a maritime identity built around water, pain, and team-based hardship. Delta selection looks for a very specific kind of person inside a population that is already advanced. Different missions create different filters. The mistake is thinking there is only one definition of hard. There is the kind of hard that makes the body quit first. There's the kind of hard that makes the mind turn against itself slowly. There is the kind of hard that exposes selfishness inside a team. And there is the kind of hard that reveals whether a person can operate without needing anyone to see how much he is suffering. Navy SEAL training became famous because the suffering has a stage. Delta selection became feared because it does not. That is the cleanest way to understand the difference. BUD/S has the beach, the bell, the boats, the cold water, and Hell Week. It turns pain into something the public can see and remember. Delta selection lives in a different space. Quieter, more selective, and aimed at people who have already made it through serious military filters before they arrive. So is Navy SEAL training more brutal than Delta Force selection? Visually, yes. Publicly, yes. Culturally, probably. But that does not automatically make it harder in every way. It makes it easier to understand. The real answer is sharper than a simple ranking. Navy SEAL training looks more brutal because its pain is public, physical, and iconic. Delta Force selection feels heavier in a different way because its pressure is quiet, private, and aimed at people who are already difficult to impress. In the end, elite training should not be judged by how brutal it looks on camera. It should be judged by whether it finds the kind of person the mission actually requires. Suffering alone does not create an elite operator. The point is not to make training look brutal. The point is to make sure the wrong man fails there before the mission makes everyone pay for it. If you want more breakdowns like this, subscribe to Shadow Regiment and comment below which selection you think is more dangerous to fail: BUD/S, SFAS, Ranger School, or Delta Force selection.